Donald Cohen is the founder and executive director of In the Public Interest, a national research and policy center that studies public goods and services. His opinion pieces and articles have appeared in many major publications, but he is speaking to us today about his recently published book, The Privatization of Everything: How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. Donald, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Ethical Humanist Society of Long Island.
Thank you so much. I am really, as we all are, sorry that we're not together in the same room. I was hoping to be in Huntington this weekend. My sister lives there. I grew up on Long Island. I grew up in New Hyde Park, but left, well, when I left high school, I left New York, didn't go back, but I still have family there. So Mel, if you could just in the chat, put the name of the song and the group so we can Google it and look for it, because I actually have a very active music hobby. I listen to live music and we're always looking for songs like that. So next week I was supposed to go to Scotland for a music for a Celtic music festival. That one's canceled as well. So I'm going to talk for a little bit. Somebody will help me keep time. And given that we're on Zoom, I have the chat open. And and maybe feel free even to raise your hand or break in so that we can be discursive and all, so if you have a question or I'm talking too fast or you wanted me to pause, I'm fine with that. And maybe David or others can kind of pay attention if someone's got their hand up, feel free. I'm going to put in the chat right now the link to buy the book, because now that I've published a book, I'm supposed to ask people to buy it. So now I'm a salesperson as well. I've been sending people to bookshop.org, which supports independent, which works with independent bookstores around the country. So we're, that's when we ask people to buy the book, the first thing we say is go to your local independent bookstore. If not, go to Bookshop, because that we need to support them as well. So here's how I'm going to structure what I'm going to say. So I'm going to give a couple of, normally you're supposed to start these talks with a story, but I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to give you 3 definitions, but I'm not going to describe them in great length. Then I'm going to give you a bunch of examples, and then I'll go back to those ideas and illustrate those definitions of those ideas a little bit. First, because the book it's called The Privatization of Everything. So it has a pretty broad swath of things that it covers, but at its core, it's about a few basic things. So first of all, let me tell you what I mean, how I define the word privatization and what privatization is. I define it as follows: as private control and power over public goods. And that can happen in a variety of ways, which we'll talk about later. Private control over public goods. Then the second kind of definition or idea is what's a public good. Now, I don't know if there's any economists on the Zoom here, but it's not what the economists say in the textbooks in our definition. It's basically the things that we all need to survive and thrive: education, health, a clean environment, knowledge, community, democracy, sort of the big ability, mobility, the ability to move around, the things that we all need, and the things that we can only do if we want to do it for everybody, which what public means all, that we can only do if we do them together. So that's the second definition: public goods. It's the stuff we all need. And then democracy. I just want to say a word about democracy, because that's at the core of the book. My core belief is that privatization is an assault on democracy. And I'll talk more about that as well. Mostly, especially these days, these weeks, we're thinking about democracy as voting rights and a variety of things, but it's a lot more than voting. Here's, this isn't a formal definition, but it's how I think about it. It's the ability for all of us to make decisions about the things that matter to all of us. And so that's number one, the things that we all need. And it's the ability to carry out those decisions, whether we all play a role, the law, government, businesses, individuals. And so that's democracy. It's our ability to carry, to go forth, and meet our needs and decide as the world changes, what those needs are and how to do it together. So that's I'll come back to all that. So let me give you a few examples because it's better to talk in the specifics sometimes than abstractions. So Chicago. I don't know if anybody's from Chicago here, probably. So in 2008 and 2009, something around that period, when we were in the heat of the Great Recession and cities were in terrible fiscal shape, bleeding red ink, facing really hard choices. So what happened, pardon me, what happened is this was on a Friday. It's early here. This is I haven't spoken yet. It's 8. By the way, I live in Los Angeles. It's freezing cold here. It's 46 degrees. It's horrible, just to give you a sense. On a Friday, the mayor at the time, which was Mayor Daley, announced a proposal from a consortium of businesses and investors, Morgan Stanley, a fund from the Middle East, and a national parking company. And that consortium offered the city $1.1 billion up front. Remember, they're desperate. They're in desperate straits, in exchange for control of the city's 36,000 parking meters for 75 years. In other words, till 2083, they were going to have control of the parking meters. They voted on Tuesday. There was no scrutiny. There was no evaluation. It was a fast moving train. What turned out to be true afterwards. Now, first off, it's an incredibly stupid way to raise money. Who knows if we're going to be driving in 2083. So, everybody borrows on future revenue. That's how we buy houses and all that, but incredibly stupid. Even if it was the only thing, they sold $1 billion too cheaply. They just got taken by Wall Street, by investors. But here's the more important issue. For the entire life of the contracts, the remaining 60 some odd years, if the city wants to eliminate parking spots for a street fair for the weekend, but more importantly for dedicated bus lanes for permanently, or bike lanes, or street mall, pedestrian malls, because land use, housing is changing and all that, they have to buy the spots back. Okay, so think about that. So it's expensive, so they don't do it in a lot of cases. I worked with a professor who interviewed transit planners in Chicago who could no longer have, just didn't have the resources to create bus rapid transit lanes. So if you think about it, cities are responsible for land use, for housing, for transportation, for cleaning the air, for a whole lot of things. And in all those areas of civic government responsibility, their hands are tied. That's an assault on democracy. That's one example. Second example, related to COVID. So now universities are now privatizing their dorms. They're doing public-private partnerships for dorms, letting them build new dorms or upkeep them or just maintain them, but for a long time, these contracts are long-term. So there's private companies that are doing this. So when COVID happened, schools shut down, kids sent home. Nobody's in the dorms. And as universities started to want to bring back students, they wanted to bring them back, but with fewer kids in the dorm for social distancing, have lower occupancy. And so when they did that, there's just a couple of universities in particular we looked into and found some documents on, Georgia State and Wayne State in Detroit, in Michigan. When they did that, they received a letter from the company. The company's name is Corvias, and I'll read you just a line from their letter. It said, and it was from their lawyers. It said, the university does not have the unilateral right under the agreement to institute a policy that would limit the number of students who can occupy student housing. Okay, so the university is responsible for the education of the students, of their health, of their well-being. And again, their hands are tied by a legal contract that they can't do their job. So there's more in the letter that says, our revenue depends on kids in the dorms, and you can't affect our revenue. That's another example. Moving on, trade transparency. One of the things you lose in privatization is, ability to know things about about government actions or public services rather. So I'm going to give an example about education. So charter schools, I don't know if there's a lot of charters on Long Island. There are in New York City, I know, because I've read quite a bit. So charter schools were originally, a new idea. The head of American Federation of Teachers at the time, Albert Schenker, was an advocate of these ideas to create small kind of learning labs, places where teachers could experiment, come up with new methods, and then share those methods, right? So that everybody benefits. That's a good thing. R&D for education. So but that's not what it's become. And now it's become kind of a market good, and it's sort of in the market now where schools compete against one another. But here's what also is what we found by looking at schools around the country, and it's not necessarily universal, but it's a number of schools require charter schools require their teachers before they're hired to sign non-disclosure agreements that the teachers won't share the companies or sometimes it's nonprofit, but run by a private company. They agree not to share. They're prohibited from sharing the company's trade secrets. Okay. The question is, what are the trade secrets? The trade secrets are lesson plans, curriculum, teaching methods, right? The stuff that we should be sharing is now locked behind paywalls, essentially. It's locked behind proprietary interests. And there's lots of other examples of loss of transparency as well. But that's really important. Another example, I'll just give a couple more just because I could go on. Literally, the book is 300 pages. I could go on for quite some time. So, when something is a market good versus a public good, a market good means, you get it if you pay for it, right? So the National Weather Service, when I looked at the weather here, I looked on my phone for, it's what the temperature was. We all look on our phones or we Google, and all of the data that we get in our phone apps or on Weather Channel or whatever comes from the National Weather Service. It's all public data, free public data. But there are companies, AccuWeather and others that you probably may be familiar with that, package it differently and offer special services to companies and others, and they do that. So here's another example. So AccuWeather is a big one, and if you pay close attention to this stuff, the head of AccuWeather was Trump's first appointee. He never made it to run the National Weather Service. It was quite scandalous. Fortunately, he never made it. So AccuWeather, there was a tornado in Oklahoma, I think. I don't have that written down. So I think it was in Oklahoma. And this is, and I'll give us a quote from the CEO of AccuWeather, the private weather company. Two trains stopped 2 miles apart. They watched the tornado go between them. Now, this is the trains. It was the train, the train company, Union Pacific was the train company. They had purchased the services of AccuWeather. So they stopped 2 miles apart. They watched the tornado go between them. Unfortunately, it went into a town that didn't have our service, and a couple of dozen people were killed. But the railroad did not lose anything. So I think, the Weather Service does have, warning systems and all that, but they have limited resources, right? So they weren't able to do it quick enough, or people didn't see it. So in other words, you could be safe from a tornado if you pay. Right, that's really what that says. And then final, just another short example. So Medicaid got privatized in Kansas and Iowa a number of years ago. Medicaid, healthcare, and people. Let me say it this way. So. And what it was sold as is it'll be cheaper. They'll say the state will save money. I mean, this is what you hear all the time around, when you outsource something, you privatize something. It'll be cheaper and better. So, what happened when they privatized things is because, the companies had to make money. They're a private company. They have investors, shareholders and all that. They had to make money. This sort of the obvious thing happened. Two things happened. One is they bid too low. So one of the companies came back and said, you didn't give us enough. So first off, they said cheaper, but then they had to come back because they realized they weren't making enough. But the other thing is, where does the money for, the money from shareholders and that goes to shareholders and other expenses, where does that come from? It can only come from one place, and that's service. So people got less healthcare. It's kind of that simple. And that's exactly what happened. And then they also, to the point of transparency, the recipients also had a harder time. They weren't able to get information about their denials, when they were, and the application process or the appeal process for denials was much more complicated, and they weren't able to even find out why they were denied in a number of cases. So those are I could go on and give more examples. So let me just, there was a question. I'll wait for that question because I'll have to think about that one. So again, if you have any questions or any points, feel free. So it's, so it's really, and it covers, in the book, you'll see it covers everything. It covers food and water and transportation and science and education and libraries and parks. It's sort of a, when we say the privatization of everything, it really is kind of everything that is public around us, all the public things. So next I want to say, what's this really all about? In the end, things are fairly simple. And I'd say it's about three things in my mind. It's sort of driven by three forces and things. One is there are true believers. There are people who believe the market is better than government to provide for everybody. They really exist. They're not in it for the money. And this is what they believe. So again, here's an example of, just to give a taste of that, Milton Friedman, probably many of you know who he was, a very conservative economist, came up with the idea in the 50s of school vouchers, which we are now seeing in states across the country right now, particularly red states. So he says, in my ideal world, government would not be responsible for providing education any more than it is for providing food and clothing. He thinks that public education should be in the market. Parents and kids should just go shopping around and be able to get their education. So there's a worldview there that has had a real impact on American politics and society. Next, what it's about, money. So pre-COVID, governments in America were spending about $7 trillion a year. State, federal, state, local, school board, school district, everything was spending. Now it's more because of all the American Rescue Plan and the infrastructure bill and all that. But so it's in the trillions. There are corporations who do all that stuff, and corporations are simple things. They want to sell stuff. So they want to sell, they look for markets, and they look for markets of folks who have money. And $7 trillion is fairly, it's a lot. I don't think any of us have that kind of cash. So they're looking to buy things. And, corporations over the last 20, 30 years have gotten very good at, with their, basically sales teams, lobbyists and and marketers and all that, in offering their services to mayors, to governors, to school districts, to the federal government. So that, there is a massive push by those that could, that do what they do. I think businesses sell things, and that's fine. It's just that, they want to sell and provide our stuff. So that's the next. It's a big force. And then finally, there's the politics of privatization. There's, folks like, if you know who Grover Norquist is, there's a famous quote that it's his famous quote that says, I don't want to shrink government, and I don't want to eliminate government. I just want to shrink it so it's small enough to fit in a bathtub and drown it, or something close to that. He's a conservative anti-tax strategist. So there's, they think this is a way to downsize government. It turns out it's not, but, facts are different than what people say. I don't know if you noticed that over the past few years. We live kind of in a fact-free world. But it's also those that want to get rid of unions, right? They want to get rid of public sector unions. The teachers union is top target for conservative political folks, strategists and campaigns and politicians. They really, they think they're in the way of, in the end, kind of going where Milton Friedman want to go. So those are kind of the three big forces. So next, I'm just kind of go back and sort of summarize with the ideas. And so one is that when I say privatization is about democracy, the Chicago parking meters, it's about taking away our ability to make decisions. about stuff that matters, like I mentioned earlier. Private prison contracts around the country have bed guarantees in them, or it's keep the beds filled or pay anyway, right? So that both takes money away from things that we could need if we're paying for empty beds, but more importantly, it makes prisons, who are, the big prison companies are publicly traded. They have responsibilities to their fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. Everything they do in politics and policy, which is a lot, is about keeping heads in beds. And that's counter to our interests, in my belief. We have way too many people. And I mentioned, the transparency. I mean, and the non-disclosure agreements and charters is one thing, but it's also just basic information. When Connecticut did its health exchange after Obamacare, Maximus got the contract to create the health exchange. When reporters and others tried to find out about the contract, the contract was, they filed Freedom of Information Act requests. They got a contract that was completely redacted. They couldn't find out how much it cost, per person. They couldn't find out how much people, the employees made. They couldn't find out anything, basically. And if you can't find out things, you can't make decisions. And if you can't find out, we can't be involved in democratic decisions. So that's, I'll give a small other example because I like it. There are a number of places that are creating private incineration, trash incineration, because their landfills are filled up. And there are companies that say, we'll do that. And embedded in those contracts are something called a put and pay clause, that they will either, the cities that contract with them will either fill up, put the amount of trash that they committed to, or pay anyway, kind of like the bed guarantee in a prison. So as I think it was in Florida, trash was going down and the companies were not getting the amount of trash. So what was happening is cities were now diverting trash from recycling that could be recycled into incineration because their hands were tied and they had to pay anyway. So these are sort of the fine print of these contracts takes away our authority in every case. Next, I want to mention efficiency and extraction. Can someone tell me how I'm doing on time? I have no idea.
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay.
About 5.
Perfect.
Okay.
People say efficiency. I kind of referred to this earlier in the Medicaid example. People say, well, businesses are more efficient. And we have to interrogate that idea because I have different thoughts about that. So one is, like I said with Medicaid, every dollar in everything that's privatized, whether it's a private prison or a water system or whatever, every dollar that goes to returns to investors, executive compensation packages, the private prison companies, the top 5 executives make like 10 or 12 million dollars. I mean, it's huge amounts of money. I think that's low. I haven't looked at this in a bit. Every dollar for debt service, because they buy other companies, every one of those dollars is a dollar not being put in the service. So I'll just mention when they say, because we hear it every day, but they're more efficient. Well, we say, okay, well, you're taking away that money. What are you taking it from? Because efficiency, you mean you're going to do it cheaper. And if you're going to do it cheaper, it's quite a finite list of things you can spend less money on. Occasionally you can come up with an idea to do it better. That, we can buy that. But you can have fewer workers. You can provide less care. You could pay the employees less. You could have crummier or lower quality equipment or supplies. There was prisons in Michigan and Ohio that outsourced their food, and the quality of food was so bad they found maggots in it, and there were not riots, but there was bad food in prisons creates dangerous prisons. So it's real simple. So we just say, if you think you can do it more efficiently, just tell us, what are you going to spend less on? Because it may not be in our interest. Next, what I say about the market, because they say, oh, the free market, that's a better instrument. The free market is just it's the market's a real thing, but it's actually, let me say one thing. They also say, we should run government like a business, and that's what they mean, like in market with competition, with profit, profit motive and all that. And what I say is just the markets, there are public things and there are private things. The market's the wrong tool for public things. market sells things only to people with money, right? Like the weather example. All right. If we want things to happen for everyone, you can't put the market in charge. And we do. We want everyone to have healthcare, we want everyone to have education, et cetera. And then finally, a privatized America, in my belief, is a divided America. And that's really, in today's divided world, the song that Mel put up, if water's a commodity and we have to pay for it, which we do, we pay in the US as a commodity. Maybe that's the right thing. So, maybe at some point you need to charge people. I'm not an expert, so that people don't overuse or at some level. But when you make it a public good, something that you pay for, and turn us into consumers rather than citizens, two things happen. One is those that can't afford don't get as much. And two, that we are in our heads, we think, well, it's only about us. It's only about us buying something. When it really is about everyone having something. We forget that we're citizens, that it's in our interest for everyone to have clean water, not just me. Not just as a matter of values, but as a matter of how we make a good society. I think we've learned from COVID, at least some of us have learned from COVID, that the health of all of us depends on the health of each of us. So it's not just I don't want it, but I don't want anybody to have it. So I think that's, the division is real. And what we're seeing in schools is increasing segregation, more stratification in general. So let me just finish. Somebody will ask, I won't go in deep on how to stop it because it always is part of the question. So that's kind of cheating on my part. But I will say there are hopeful signs. So I'll give one example, and then hopefully I meet David's time limit. Broadband, right? It's pretty clear now to all of us that everybody needs it for health, for education, for commerce. I mean, it's as fundamental as the interstate highway system, as a piece of infrastructure. As cities began to create municipal broadband, so that public broadband, telecom companies went to state legislators to prevent cities from being able to do that. They're called preemption. They preempted cities from establishing municipal broadband. It's legal. It's wrong, but it's legal. In Colorado, they did that, but they allowed cities to vote to create, it was kind of what I call a pro-public loophole. I don't think this is what it was. They allowed cities to, if they wanted to municipal broadband, they'd have to do a public vote. And what it turned out is every city that's done it, it was passed by overwhelming margins. Fort Collins, Denver, Loveland, I mean, there's kind of a long list, and it's a growing list. So people kind of get the difference between public and private. They get what we want. And so, and I could give other examples, other positive examples, water system, I will give two more. Baltimore citizens put an initiative on the Baltimore ballot to prevent the privatization of water, and they won. Private prisons have been closed by citizen action. So, it's not all doom and gloom. So let me hand it to David.